Welcome to the Wtf Show podcast from Bangkok, Thailand. Presented by Vimol Kogar. Tune in to get your dose of weekly verbal Red Bull.
Welcome one and all to the WTF Show. Today we have Sparsh. Welcome to the show, Sparsh.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good to be here.
Sparsh, tell me a little bit about yourself.
I'm 33 years old. I've been DJing all over for a number of years, for over 15 years now. And aside from that, I also have a day job. I work as a procurement and sales manager at a chemical distribution company.
Tell me where you went to school and how was your childhood?
Yeah, it was a very interesting childhood. So my family moved here. My mom and dad moved here when I was 4 years old. I did my nursery and kindergarten here, and then I was shipped off to boarding school in India. During that time, my parents split up, and then my mom got remarried, and my mom then got pregnant with my younger brother. And so when that happened, she decided that she'd want, the two of us to grow up in the same house. So I was then pulled out of boarding school and brought here, and I was at NIST from age 12 and up until I graduated high school. After that, I was in the UK for my undergrad, and then I came back here.
So what was your vocation in undergrad and what made you choose it?
So I graduated with a BSc in psychology, and what attracted me to the subject was just people. I mean, people are really interesting. I like figuring out why people do the things that they do. And it really ties into it's interesting. Psychology is a really interesting subject because if the way it's taught, especially in the UK, you can really link it to so many different fields, management, sales, everything. So, and a lot of these subjects like marketing is born out of psychology. So it's a very interesting subject, and I just thought it had a lot of applications beyond just that specific route of being a clinical psychologist or being a therapist. And being of Indian background, my options were somewhat limited, right? So like my parents were very clear. It's either doctor, engineer, worst case scenario, a lawyer. Those are your options. And then I threw, somewhere in the midst of all that, I threw DJing into it, which was obviously shot right down. And then psychology was an acceptable middle ground for everybody. I didn't want to do engineering. It was just not at all where my interests were. Yeah.
So when you got back to Bangkok and you looked for a job after you graduated, was that a difficult proposition or were there jobs easy to get?
No, definitely. It was really rough because 2009, I even tried to stay in the UK in terms of employment, but it was a very difficult time because that wasn't quite working out. I wasn't getting what I wanted there. And I didn't see the point in continuing to stay. Or a lot of people at that time, especially my age, this is 2009, people have obviously financial crisis. People were trying very hard to just stay afloat. And I didn't see the point of me, just going off and doing my master's just because it was a difficult job market or anything like that. So yes, it was difficult, but I also think I got lucky. That's all.
So are you happy in your current job?
Sure. Happiness is a relative term, I would say. I think it pays the bills. I'm pretty decent at it, at what I do. So yes, no major complaints. I wish I got more sleep. That would maybe be my only complaint with regards to this job, but that's about it.
Tell me a little bit about your relationship with your family and your faith.
And my faith. And my faith. Okay, so let's start with faith. I'm not religious at all. I don't. If I had to put myself into a box, it would be I would consider myself spiritual, but even that's relatively toned down. A very toned down version of spirituality, I would say. So yes, I'm faithless in a way. My family, we're a very interesting bunch. My mom is quite well educated, given the generation that she's from. She has a master's degree. She was teaching at a university for quite a while before I came along. And in fact, had it not been for my birth, she probably would have finished her PhD as well. My father is also very similar in that he was very highly educated. He had a chemical engineering degree, and then he went on to do his master's in business administration, an MBA, basically. And so there were expectations in the house.
So all of us in Bangkok here come from multiracial, multicultural type upbringings. We are of the diaspora. We are generally second or third generation in a country that maybe a couple of generations ago we were unfamiliar with. We've now called Thailand our home. But a lot of the Indian diaspora in Thailand still have struggles with their identity. What do you think?
I think it's natural. No, to me, this seems like a very natural thing to happen. I would be second generation, I suppose. My parents were the ones that moved here. I wasn't even born in Thailand, actually. So I don't know. Loosely speaking, I guess I would be second generation. But I think that's very natural. Growing up, half in India, half here, between boarding school in India and then coming to a school like NIST here was such a dramatic shift. Even in the most basic of things, how you address teachers, for example. Like here, we called our teachers by name. It was, Miss, Mr. Hammer, for example, my maths teacher, the first one I can remember, or Miss Cynthia, my high school psychology teacher. So, which we never did in India, right? It was sir or madam. There's no way you would. So there was obviously a huge change, and I think when you move, when people move, or rather when they immigrate, I should say, you tend to become. This is my opinion, and I could be very wrong, of course. But my observations have led me to believe that you tend to hold on to your culture a lot tighter. And I saw that as well in my home. I mean, my parents really tried hard to make sure that, I grew up with a clear knowledge and understanding of what it means to be Indian. All of that has gone out the window. The minute I left, for university, all of that went out, and I kind of decided to create my own little roadmap. Which, isn't necessarily, I can't say it was a great idea. I can't say it was a bad idea. It was just the path I chose for myself. So yes, I think it's a very tricky situation to navigate. If you've moved from, your country of origin to another country, and then you're trying to just figure out where you really belong. I've struggled with it. I think in many ways I still struggle with it. And I've been living outside of India now for, I'm 33. We moved when I was 4. So it's been a very long time.
Yet your colleagues and friends around part of that diaspora, especially the fourth generation friends of yours, some of their families have done particularly well.
Certainly. I think that I think that's also a testament to, the spirit that Indians in general, I feel. And I suppose this applies to all, ethnicities, but coming from a country that was at the time extremely impoverished. So if you go back to perhaps when your parents would have moved, so that that would probably be like my grandparents' age. So, you struggled to ensure that your ends were meeting, that you had the basic necessities of life. And that struggle is witnessed by a lot of people, right? It's witnessed by the family that goes through it. The next generation in that family has not yet forgotten what it took to get to that to the level of success. And so you perpetuate it. Like, it goes from one generation to another. And I think that's why you'll find that, generally speaking, Indian immigrants almost all over the place are relatively successful. But you could also say the same of Chinese immigrants. You could say the same of many different countries, of immigrants from many different countries, I'm sorry. And I think, again, it boils down to how much struggle there was to get to that point where you didn't have to worry that much anymore. And I think generations witnessed this. Like, I witnessed it with my parents. Both my parents were working, and they worked extremely hard. I can't honestly say I saw much of my dad growing up because he was consistently, traveling for work. I saw more of my mom, I think, just because of the nature of her job. She'd leave. She had classes at set times, so she'd leave in the morning. She'd be home by the evening. But they worked their butts off. I mean, it was crazy. I don't think I worked nearly as hard as they did. And so this is what I mean. Like, I hope to kind of, work harder. But I think this is what a lot of people witness as they're growing up, and it gets ingrained in them, this work ethic of just, you have to do better, and you have to not give up, and you just keep pushing yourself.
So, Sparsh, WTF is about youth empowerment and peer-to-peer support.
Sure.
And we are here also talking to our audience who are maybe looking for a job. I generally look at it as a investment, like a return to investment type of equation. Mm-hmm. And international education in Thailand plus university education sets you back about $800,000 US, give or take.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. And yet you come back home, and a lot of these guys either can't find jobs or find jobs that pay $1,000. So it'll take them, I guess, mathematically 800 months to pay back that loan. So here we are. We're in 2021, and the jobs are hard to get. What advice do you have to people who are struggling out there?
So before I come to that, since you mentioned a number with regards to what it costs, this is so anecdotal, but I just want to mention this. It's quite funny. My father, who has since passed, but when he was still alive, we had this conversation once, and about the costs and the way it came up was, I was unmarried at the time, and so my dad was like, son, it's time. When is this gonna happen, and when are you gonna have kids? And I joked with him. I was like, are you insane? Like, there's no way I'm having kids. I'm not. Look at how much, look at the amount of money you've spent. And my father said, no, but you don't understand that. And before he even completed his sentence, I stopped him and I said, look, let me just tell you, I've done the maths on this. If you'd chosen to not have me, you could have probably bought a Ferrari in Thailand. Which is, because of the import duties, they're like ridiculously priced here. And my dad stopped me right there as well. And he's like, no, you don't understand the pleasure, the joy that a child brings to your life. I was like, have you ever driven a Ferrari before? Because if you haven't, I don't think the comparison can be made. Like, I don't know what the pleasure a Ferrari, driving a Ferrari gives you. So let's get through that first, and then we'll talk about kids. But in any case, your question was, what advice, do I have? First of all, I have to preface this by saying I don't think I'm anyone important enough to be giving any advice on the subject. But all I can do is explain my experience and what that's been like the past, X number of years. So the first thing, and also what I've witnessed in my job, like when I'm potentially looking at new people coming in or, people joining my team and so on. The first thing I would say is for anyone that is kind of finishing up their education now, please understand, and I know this is a horrible thing to say, but you are really not that special. You're not. And I know that sounds really horrible to say, but it's also the truth. There are thousands of other graduates who are going to be gunning for those exact same limited pool of jobs. So if you go in with this attitude of, well, I deserve it because I'm X, Y, no, you don't. I've seen this happening at interviews at my workplace where very young people come in with this sort of attitude about themselves. And it's like, I don't understand where it comes from. So that would be understand very, very clearly that there's always going to be someone who has a better degree from a more well-reputed university or has something on their CV that will, put them one step above you. So anytime you're going in for a job interview, if you go in with an attitude of, I'm definitely better than everybody else in this room, I think you've already lost. That's not to say that, you walk in feeling like shit about yourself. I'm not suggesting that either. But don't try to overstep. Be confident, but don't be overconfident.
Don't be cocky.
Very obvious. Yeah, don't be cocky. Thank you. Don't be cocky, because everyone can see through that, especially when you're 22, 21, 22-year-old, or 25 if you've already done your master's, but have no work experience in between. So that would be one. Second bit would be that understand that, it's rough right now. It's extremely difficult. It's tough for everybody. I'm barely meeting my KPIs at work, barely. And who knows? I might be out of a job in a few months. I have no idea. That is the landscape you currently exist in. And it's also the landscape that millions of other people exist in. So don't let that, put you down. Again, there's a fine balance. Don't let it put you down, but also don't just sit there doing nothing all day to progress your career forward. Perhaps there are some skills you could learn. There are so many outlets for that, right? Whether it's online courses that are relatively inexpensive to learn something new, or just even free stuff like on YouTube. So consistently developing, skills is really important, I would say. Even if maybe you've been looking for a job for 6 months and you haven't found anything, or you haven't found what you really want and you're just, you're waiting for the right job. That's fine too. If you can afford it, if you can wait it out, sure, that's your choice. You as an individual know better what your situation is, but don't stop developing as a person. Because that, I think, is where things start to go horribly wrong career-wise for a lot of people. And even in their personal life, I would say, always try to be better.
Okay, so Sparsh, you have a few musical skills. You DJ at parties and events in Thailand.
Very limited musical skills.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about how you started DJing and whether you learned something, or is that a technical skill? What is it?
No, it is. I think definitely it is. I've been DJing. I started when I was 15. 15 was my first paid event. The first time I got to go, and somebody said, we will hand you some money if you come and play your music for X number of hours. So I love it. I absolutely love music. Has been my life. Music has saved my life. I think it was an escape when I needed an escape. I think it was a great outlet to explore my creativity. It remains, even to this day, a great outlet for me. I can't meditate, but the closest I can get to a meditative state is when I'm messing around with music, be that at home or be that at an event that I'm DJing for. When I first started off, it was weird the way I first started off. Actually, and perhaps this is where things like international schools are helpful, I suppose. So you have to usually, at most international schools, NIST is where I was, you have to fulfill a certain number of community service hours, CAS. They have this CAS program. And so I didn't want to, be part of the theater performance or anything, but I had to get involved at some level. So I decided to join the sound and lighting team. And lighting seemed boring, sound seemed a bit more fun, and they needed somebody, so I went in that direction. And it was just fascinating to me, mixing music in and out. Just if you've ever seen a DJ doing their thing, the first thing you'll notice is there's so many buttons and knobs, to mess around with, and I love that. Like that was just, what does this do? What does that do? So that's how I got started. I think my parents were initially extremely concerned. I think the first reaction they had to it was absolute concern, because in their minds they associated DJs with drugs and alcohol and smoking.
So do I, actually.
There you go. And so do most people. I would say, like, so do most people still. And it's amazing because I don't drink. My friends know this. This is one thing almost everyone that knows me knows this about me, is I can have maybe a drink and I'm done after that. Like I shouldn't be driving after that first drink. And so obviously this was, the first concern that my parents have. Like, this is the gateway to drugs and to alcohol. So they were very, very concerned. And then of course, like, DJing in the minds of Indian parents, who moved here just 15 years prior, it's not a legitimate career. Like, what are you doing? This is not what you're going to do with your life. Through some very intricate negotiations at home, we then came to an agreement that as long as my grades stayed at a particular level, they would allow me to continue exploring music. And it worked. I mean, I maintained my end of the bargain, right? And from that point forward, they were quite supportive. My father bought me my first pair of turntables, and it was CDJs actually. My first CDJs and a mixer, the basic equipment that you need to get started. And I think that was when I was 15. I still have all of that to this day. I mean, that equipment still functions, which is amazing. But yes, that's how I got started, and it's fantastic. I mean, obviously the past 2 years have been very slow. Not 2 years. I'm sorry. The past year in particular has been very slow. But again, this is not my bread and butter. It was never intended to be anyway. Not by the time I graduated from college. Prior to that, I was like, yes, I'm going to be a rock star DJ. People will bow to me wherever I go. Like, this was my life plan. And then, you go off to university and life hits you, in a serious way. I mean, my parents were clear about how far they were willing to support me financially in this endeavor. And beyond that, they were like, if you'd like to pursue it yourself, you're very welcome to, but this is the line that we're drawing for you. And I think that was, I'm so happy that they did that, because had they not done it, I may have gone off the tracks, I feel. And since then, I've had a very basic thing that, okay, first of all, I try to do as many kind of charitable events as I can. That's number one. Number two, if I happen to make anything, it usually goes right back into buying more equipment. To me,
so it's sort of net flow, sort of equal or negative sometimes.
Exactly. So for me, again, it's not my bread and butter. It was never, at least by the time I was 21, I was like, it's not what it's intended to be. But I love it. I absolutely love it. And I intend to keep going, further and further with it.
Tell me a little bit about your musical influences. What do you listen to?
Oh, I listen to everything, and there is no genre that is too out there to at least try once. And I would, again, that's one thing that, as a general piece of advice, I would give to everyone. Like, try everything once, except for hard drugs. Don't that, with the exception of hard drugs, try everything once in your life. So when it comes to music, I follow the same approach. It's funny, when I first started off, I started off loving techno and trance, and because a very close family friend of ours was very into that music, somebody who was older than me. And so he, he would have money to go out and buy CDs. So I'd listen to what he would listen to. And I really got into these genres. And to me, they're also universal in a way because, you don't need to necessarily understand English to enjoy that music. So I love that. I love that anyone could listen to it around the world and it would elicit the same, emotions. And then at some point, I'm not even sure when this happened, I really got into 70s and 80s pop and rock. I don't know at what age this happened.
Like sort of what type of music?
So everything. So for example, bands like Kansas, and then it was probably the earliest ones that I listened to. And then, of course, the classics like Led Zeppelin and why are names disappearing from my head now? Van Halen, Led Zeppelin. Van Halen obviously came much later. Madonna, like early Madonna. I love 80s Madonna still to this day. I'm a huge fan. Bee Gees, everything from the 70s and 80s. You'll find it on my playlists. I don't know when I got into this music, but I love it. And then slowly, I got more and more into hip hop as well. Which again, initially I wasn't much into it, but it started to happen because there was a lot of demand for it, especially parties for teenagers. At that age, when I was 15, 16, I was doing a lot of parties for friends or birthdays or whatever. This is what everyone wanted to hear, and so that's how I then also jumped from trance and techno to 80s music, and then to hip hop. 70s rock, everything. I don't say no to anything when it comes to listening to music. If you tell me, if you give me a band and if I haven't heard of them, the first thing I'm going to do is go home and give them a listen.
Let's move to relationships, Sparsh.
Sure.
Sparsh, we live again in a community where we tend to marry the people who look and think like us. It's generally the case,
Sure.
right? And for the people out there who may or may not be looking for a lifetime partner, so two things have made things difficult. One is the pandemic, so there's not many chances for social interaction.
Sure.
And the other thing, there's this cultural bias or a sort of a culture shock. When you go into the community, you're an alien community coming to Thailand. You're an outside community, and you're looking for a life partner that hopefully somebody you can get along with and make a family with in the long term.
Sure.
And what advice would you give young people in terms of looking for love, as it were?
So let me start off by saying, you keep saying young people. I thought I was still young, but you keep saying young people, and I'm thinking like at 33, am I not young anymore? What is happening? But moving past that, what I would suggest to anyone at any age that is, first of all, understand young people that the choice you make in terms of a partner is going to dramatically influence your life. You might think that you can compartmentalize. You cannot. The person you are with is going to influence you day in and day out. So make that choice wisely. That is advice number one. I say that coming from a perspective of I got married when I was in my mid-20s, and that marriage lasted barely 9 months. So I'm coming from a perspective of, I've been through this process of getting married to somebody and then getting divorced. And it was a terrible experience. I wish it upon nobody. And so yes, be very careful with that choice. Number one. Number two, there is no rush of any kind, not biological, not
societal.
Well, there are pressures, but ignore it. Look, at the end of the day, if you get married because your parents have put some pressure on you to do so, At the end of the day, understand that, under normal circumstances, you should outlive your parents, right? Your parents are older, they'll go first. You will have to live with that choice, not them. So be extremely careful with that particular choice. Hilariously, my father passed, and my mom realized that I was rushing into my marriage. She said, "Listen, maybe take an extra year. She's still young. You're still very young. There's really no reason. There's no reason to rush into this." I ignored that advice completely, and it was an utter disaster. Had I waited it out, perhaps just even another 8 months, I would have realized that this was a mistake. So no rush of any kind. If for any reason you do feel rushed, then something's wrong. Either you're thinking wrong, or there's pressure on you that should not exist. So be very, very careful with regards to this. It's such a huge decision that will impact everything in your life. And especially, I think, for people of Indian origin, because divorce is still something that's a little bit of a taboo. So it's not as simple as, well, you get married today, and because Indians we don't have this attitude of, if it doesn't work out, we'll just split up. This is not how we are taught to think. When I made the decision to split up with my ex-wife, it was horrible. It was so difficult. I didn't know. I questioned the morality of that decision. I questioned it at so many different levels, when really the only question I should have asked was, is this or is this not the right person for me? And that should be the only criteria that matters. Now, the right person for you might come along when you're 40. If you're lucky, they'll come around earlier, or there's so many ways that life works out. So do not rush this. When it comes to dating, the world's an interesting place now with Tinder and Bumble and all of these apps. Even with regards to that, the only piece of advice I would give everyone that's listening is swipe slower. Whether you're swiping right or left, just take a minute, and it's become so easy. You mentioned COVID and the impact that's had, or may have had on people who are trying to socialize, but with these apps in place, sure, meeting a person in meeting a person in real life has become a little bit trickier, and was during the last year, but not so much anymore, I don't think. And I think especially in Thailand, that period where going out was a big deal was relatively short. So swipe slower, guys and girls. Everybody, just take a breath, man. Like, there's no reason to just, you don't have to be swiping through it like it's Instagram. Like, take a second. Read through the person's profile. Like, look at what you're doing. And yeah, never ever feel pressure. This is so critical. I'm repeating this because if at any point, whether it's you putting pressure upon yourself or your family putting pressure upon you, there's something wrong with that. Both of those equations. Relook at it. It's such a dramatic decision that you will take for your life. And you cannot take it lightly. Absolutely not.
Tell me a little bit about your WTF let me say that again. WTF moment. The moment in your life where things pivoted and you wanted to move in a totally different direction, whether socially or at work, or just the way you thought things out.
There have been so many. It's so hard. I listened to the podcast, and I've heard people you've had on here, and they've all had, like, most of them have had this one moment or a couple of moments, but I've had so many. I don't know where to start. Whether it was the first time that I DJ'd in front of a bunch of people and they actually liked it, that was a big moment for me. And when I was like, wow, this is something I really am going to do for the rest of my life, definitely. Whether it's my career or not became secondary, but as a passion, that fire was lit. Number one. Number two, I think, had to have been when I was at university. And this is post 9/11, which some of the listeners maybe were too young to even, really have felt the impact of that immediately. But I was 13 or 14 when the Twin Towers in the U.S. were hit, and the wars began with Afghanistan and Iraq between the NATO allies in those countries. And one of the moments I had, a critical one for me at university, was this: a friend of mine, a friend of a friend, got arrested on no charges at all. It was under a suspicion. This person was then held, under the law allowed them to hold this person without any charges in the UK for a very extended period of time. And it turned into this whole thing. Students were protesting. It was a whole thing at the university. It made news and everything. And this was a big moment for me because it made me realize that the world is a tricky place once you're outside the cocoon of your house and your parents and your little international school bubble. And some real shit goes on outside of that bubble once you step out of it. So, A, be careful. Think before you do things, And number 2, try to stand up for what is right. Always. Like, this was a big thing in my house, growing up with my mom, who was really an idealist, and my dad as well. There was this focus on consistently, it doesn't matter what impact it'll have on you, but always make sure that you do the right thing. And that sentiment that they try to drill into me really hit home when I witnessed this particular situation at university. I mean, it was ridiculous that this happened to this guy. And a lot of people that I knew at the time were like, well, we don't want to get involved. We'd rather stay away. And so many, many times in your life, you will be hit with, this intersection where you will have to pick right or left. Let's not call it wrong, because I think wrong can also be very subjective. But be careful with these decisions. And yeah, this was a what the fuck moment. Oh God, are we allowed to say fuck? I don't know what I just did. But yes, that was one of my moments. The next one was a few years later when my father passed away, which I think would be a moment for any person, any young person who loses a parent at that age. I was in my mid-20s. I was 25. And it was a huge thing. I mean, I remember getting the news, completely breaking down, obviously. And my mom wasn't at home. I should mention, that, in spite of the fact that my parents were divorced, they were extremely close because of me, basically. And they always maintained a very pleasant relationship between the two of them. They were friends till the very end. And my mom was out of town when I found out. So I was alone at home. I just kind of melted down. And then there was a moment where I had to, things had to happen. Things had to be taken care of. And I knew I had to pull myself together. I had, and get on with arranging everything that needs to be arranged, and which included obviously calling my mother. And there was a moment right then when I realized that everything was going to be different from that point on. Nothing would ever be the same again. So that was another moment. And again, one that if anyone has experienced it or is experiencing it right now, my advice to you would be, definitely find solace in your friends and your family. They will be the ones that it'll be a very telling time. That will be the moment where you will realize who's really what in your life. It's moments like those that will teach you. And those are very hard learned lessons, and pay very close attention at that point in your life. The next WTF moment, I guess, was my marriage and the subsequent split from my ex-wife. I think the split was more of a moment because I woke up one morning and I had this thought where I was like, I was living in absolute misery. And I was like, there's no way. This cannot be the rest of my life.
Do you think that the incompatibility is something that you sort of push yourself into, or do you think it was both sides being immature?
I think it was partly both sides and being immature, and part of it was my sheer ignorance of the incompatibility. It was, there's a lot more to it, and I won't get into that, but there were so many warning signs. But because I felt that, no, this is probably what I should be doing in life right now, I went ahead and I pulled that trigger. And I think, again, this is so important. The minute you are thinking along the lines of, well, generally speaking, this is a good roadmap, as opposed to thinking, is this exactly what I want out of my life? Something's wrong. Stop right there, reassess everything, and then start over. Don't push through it. A lot of people, I wouldn't say everyone, a lot of people think that, once problems surface, that they simply can be dealt with. First of all, not all problems can be dealt with. There are things that simply you will not be able to fix. If the other person has bad intentions, if the other person simply is unwilling to put in the effort that you're willing to put, there's so many things. So the moment that morning, I still remember I woke up and I was like, this cannot be the rest of my life. I've worked too hard. I've put in too much effort into making something of myself to now resign myself to this misery. So be careful. Yeah. And again, that was moment number 3, I think. Moment number 4, and this is the last one, was also, this may not have been moment number 4. Full disclosure, I've completely lost count. But this was a recent one. A few years ago, I herniated a couple of discs in my neck. I won't get into what that is. If anyone's confused, please feel free to just Google disc herniation, and you will understand what that means. I was 30 when this happened, and it was the first time that I realized I have one body. I will never have another. And if I don't take care of this one body, I'm really screwed. Because I'm going to have to live with this body for the next, if I average out the age at which my maternal grandfather passed away and my paternal grandfather passed away, I should live to about 70, roughly speaking. That's another, 40 years. And it was about 40 years, at the time. And I was like, I can't, this is not a car. I can't wreck it and then just go and buy a new one 5 years later or 10 years later, or take it to a service. You get one body. And if you are the type of person that likes to be active, as I do, I love cycling. It's a huge part of my life. It has been since I was a kid. I was on my university cycling team. I've continued to cycle even after I came back to university. It's a huge part of who I am. Climbing, rock climbing, huge part of, stuff that I love doing. DJing, you might have an activity that you like. For example, you might be a professional DJ, a full-time DJ whose bread and butter comes from that. If you wreck your body, that you're done. It's over. It's a physical job. There's no way of doing it without being on your feet. So for about 2 years, I was completely done with DJing because I simply physically was unable to handle it, which was crazy. So that was moment number whatever, but it was the last one. And when I realized that you get one body and you better take care of it, like it's the most precious thing you will have in this life is probably going to be your health. So be extremely careful with that.
Sparsh, it was a pleasure today having you on the show. You are a rock star in my eyes.
Thank you so
You've
much.
taught us a lot about maybe life's not so good times And we leave you with 2 things and then a blank sheet. First thing is you get to choose who's next on the show. So that's a huge asset. You can think over it.
I like to nominate myself. I don't think there's anyone. There's no one wiser. There's no one. No, I'm kidding. I will of course think over that.
And at the end of the year, we have the WTF Youth Awards, and you get to nominate somebody aged 20 to 30 who you think does good for the community.
So close.
Okay.
Awesome.
And finally, again, thank you everybody for joining the show today. And I leave it to you for the last word, Sparsh.
Sure. So the last thing I just want to say as well is to anybody and everybody that's listening, your physical health is extremely important, but so is your mental health. This is an aspect of life that is so ignored by so many people, and you should not do it. Whether, you can easily suppress your feelings for a great number of years, but eventually it's going to catch up to you. So take care of your mind and take care of your body. Thank you.
Thank you, Sparsh. Goodbye and good luck to everybody, all you WTFers out there. Bye.
That's it from the WTF Show. Vimol and the team from WTF Show would like to thank all our sponsors. Tune in next week for another great gig with people making a difference to your future. For advertising spots, go to the WTF Show IG page and get more info or contact Vimol at 6681 616 5987.